so mysterious? Just sit down and hang with us. Why so mysterious?
This is Why So Mysterious, the podcast where we attempt to fill the gap between the bodies we have and the lack of knowledge around them,
We're sharing our experiences and answering our own questions
with some help along the way.
to destigmatize tricky, taboo topics.
The triple T's.
Welcome to another episode of Why So Mysterious, the podcast. Today we are talking about a lot of stuff, but mostly period coaching. And our guest today is Victoria Alexander. Victoria Alexander is behind The Elephant in the Womb, a space centered around inclusive reproductive health, education, and menstruality. They are a reproductive health educator, period coach, and a creator of feminist goods. Victoria has a clothing line of feminist designs that give back with every piece purchased. Her goal over the coming years is to go deeper into the political system to achieve menstrual equity for all in Canada and have the voices of all menstruators heard. Welcome to the podcast, Victoria.
Hello.
We're very excited to talk
So
to you
excited.
today. I had never even heard of a period coach until Sara introduced me to your TikTok.
Yeah.
I know there are nutritionists who consider the menstrual cycle. Obviously, there's doctors, there's physiotherapists, all that stuff, but I didn't know that that was like a straight up thing. And I also don't know how rare they are.
Yeah, I've encountered two, you and one other person I've seen doing period coaching, and I think that's it. I don't think I don't know. Are
Do
there
you
a
have
lot
a
of people?
community?
So when it comes to period coaching, it is an unregulated industry and term. So technically anybody can call themselves a period coach, which makes it like a little bit scary, of course, with anything being unregulated. But there are a good number of people in the period coaching industry. It's just dependent upon their backgrounds. Like you said, there's people that are nutritionists that specialize in hormones that then have called themselves a period coach. So I find that there's a lot of period coaches that are like holistic nutritionists or dietitians, but I don't know any other period coach that comes from an education background myself, where as a period coach, I've studied public health, reproductive health education, and more the science behind how the body works.
Well, you know how much people love science.
People love science.
So that's good.
That's awesome.
But that actually does lead very well into the very first question I have for you, which is that I read in the bio that you have on your website that you started with a childbirth and reproductive health education. So I wanted to ask like how/why did you want to get into that? And then also what if anything, did you feel like was missing from a reproductive health education standpoint that kind of led you into being a period coach in the first place? Loaded question, but
So I originally got into the reproductive space through specifically childbirth education. I'm also a registered massage therapist, not so much anymore, but years ago, that was what I primarily did. And I treated a lot of pregnant people and was like, nobody seems to know like what happens with our periods after babies and how can you even go about getting pregnant? And that led me to childbirth education and reproductive health education, which I studied for a couple of years. And I more specifically niched down into like periods and how the menstrual cycle works and birth control and everything, because I realized how much like none of us learned anything in school. So there was a big gap in understanding like how the body works and just realness around periods. And then on the other side of things, I also, like as a queer person myself, realized how much of a lack there is in reproductive health and periods for people that maybe don't identify as like a cis straight woman. So I was like, yeah, that needs to change.
Yeah.
I find that like it's also often like I know that some people might get mad at me for saying it because I know that people do struggle with like being heard as being pregnant or having children or whatever, but I do find that it gets taken a little bit more seriously when babies are on the line, when it's about whether or not you're going to get pregnant. And so if you are childless by choice or you're queer and that's not necessarily something that you want to explore, it's just like you're not seen as being the vessel, and that is very frustrating. It's just like, can we just all talk about this? Does it matter whether or not we want to have children? Because
some of us just don't.
Totally.
Or we haven't decided
Or
yet, but we still want to
decided,
know
yeah.
our own freaking bodies before we jump into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really such an invasive question when you think about it. When like, you know, as soon as you get married, typically everyone's like, okay, so are you trying to have kids? And it's like, are you really going to ask me if I'm having sex with my partner right now? And also presumptuous to assume any couple just has both the parts that are like biologically needed to conceive a child together.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It's very, that's definitely, ugh. Anyway.
And it's definitely like, I, as a fairly like newly married person, every conversation I have with like family, it's like, so are babies coming? Like, is it happening? And I'm like, dude, we've got a business that takes up all of our energy. That can't happen right now. Like, that's just like, it's something that we want to do, but like the constant like questions, like literally I got asked yesterday, like, oh, like, because I saw a baby. My sister, my stepsister had a baby. Wonderful. I got to meet her the other day. And then I was talking to my dad last night, and he's like, oh, like, I heard you saw the baby. Did it make you feel like you want to have a baby? And I was like,
why does everyone ask? I get asked that
I
too.
was like, no.
Like, my niece was born, and it's like she's the first baby that like I've ever been around that I feel very connected to and love. And like personally, I don't want to have children, and that's fine with me.
Totally fine.
But everyone asked me after she was born, "Do you have baby fever?"
It's what? And I was like, I told him straight up. I was like, no, it actually made me want to wait longer because I can see how much work it is. Like, I can see how much energy that's going to take, and that's beautiful. And you know, when you're ready to do that and you want to do that, that's great. But I'm like, I'm so tired right now. Like, I'm so tired. I cannot imagine adding that to the mix right now.
No.
But
anyways,
that was a total sidetrack.
So, the education, about just not knowing what's going on with our bodies and being pregnant, periods, post-menstruation. So is that kind of like the beginning of the waterfall into periods, was realizing that like pregnant women didn't really know what was going to happen after, like that kind of thing? Or
yeah, pretty much. I just really realized, you know, like I don't know the answers to these questions with just my childbirth education certification that I had done at the time. And that's when I was like, okay, well, I want to be able to serve my people as a whole. So I Googled, actually, I was like, period coach ? Like, does this exist? And I can't even remember who it was, but some author of some period related book popped up. And this was like 4 or 5 years ago when it really was like obsolete and didn't exist at all. And, you know, social media was just kind of like, Instagram was becoming the cool thing at the time. So there wasn't a lot of online presence in the period world. And so I found this and I was like, I want to do this, but different, but in my own way.
I love that.
And yeah, that's when I was like, okay, well, I'm going to figure out in what education there is out there that I can further. And that's when I found about public health. I did some workshops through different private schools, through different phases of menstruality, menopause, getting your first period with menarche, all of the aspects of periods.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, what is a period coach? That is like a big blanket question, but like,
I guess to you, like, what is it to you to be a period coach?
Yeah. So again, in general, like a lot of period coaches that do different things, but for me, education is what's really important. So the way that I put it is that period coaching is to understand, empower, and take control of your cycle again. So, there's a big movement of like period positivity right now. And I take the standpoint of like, let's shoot for period neutrality first, because so many of us have a very tumultuous relationship with our bodies.
100% agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And there's a lot of shame surrounding the menstrual cycle in general. And so many factors that come into play that can affect your relationship with your cycle, whether that's past trauma, gender dysphoria, conditions that make periods really shitty. Am I allowed to swear on this?
Oh, yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Totally allowed to swear.
We swear a lot.
Oh, we swear a lot.
Perfect. Yeah. So I basically like say that period coaching is for anybody that is feeling that there is a gap in their cycle, whether that's that they're having a really uncomfortable cycle and don't know their options for gaining better control of their cycle, understanding their cycle. If somebody wants to chat about birth control, my biggest thing in my personal practice is just providing unbiased education to people, because there's a lot of bias when it comes to period talk and period practitioners, right? Who are like, well, I'm going to take the stance of birth control is evil because I want to sell my program of how to come off of birth control. And I think bringing that kind of bias into the medical space, which it is, the medical space, is really dangerous because it's profiting off of people's insecurities and fears about feeling bad about their body from, say, being on birth control or something. So I really am trying to just bring unbiased education to the world of period coaching.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I love that so much. I think there's like, just the whole like the fact that so many of us have periods and that the information, it can be found, like you can find it. But what I know is like, I digest so much information about periods on a daily basis, like we both do. And I'm sure you do too. The language can be super confusing sometimes. It can also like directly contradict other things you read. There's so much misinformation out there. There's a lot of stuff that's just like, oh, well, just go on birth control. And don't even like think about why you're having like maybe like really painful periods or heavy periods or whatever. And then
there's the opposite of that, where it's like, if you eat nuts and seeds only, then like, and if you're not doing that, then you're doing it wrong, and that's why you're in pain or whatever.
Like, and so it's like, we know how to filter the information that we're receiving and like the different sources and stuff like that, but we do this for our work. Like, that's, like, it's so different for us. And I think like having a place where people can go and like get the necessary information that is unbiased, because when you read the articles, they are super biased, like a lot of the time.
Even just like, the medical community for the most part, like doesn't really, take into account like the pronouns that they're using and things like that. And so that can even reading an article that just keeps saying women, like
exactly,
like turn you off from any information that actually could be beneficial to you.
Yeah. And I think like, so the reason we named the podcast Why So Mysterious is because this, just like the world of like having a uterus, is there's not a lot of information easily found. So like, whatever might be happening with your period or your hormones or whatever, it takes a lot of work to find the answer that maybe is right for you. And I find that like, obviously with like what we do, I've seen such a huge lack of, even like in the medical industry, them, like doctors specifically, really even knowing how to help people with uteruses. And it drives me just up the wall. Like, it makes me so upset because, in my opinion, like, we should be able to rely on doctors for some assistance at least. And I remember specifically, like, I found this like doctors forum where doctors could ask other doctors questions.
Whoa, that would have been interesting.
Yeah. And this one doctor is like, oh, like I have a patient and he was using like, she has, you know, like super heavy periods, like, you know, listing off all these symptoms, and I was like, oh, it's very, like, just from my reading, it seemed like this person had endometriosis. And he was like, what could possibly be causing my patient to have this? And I was like, dude, like, this is this is absurd. And so then it was like, then I started reading the other like doctors answering this question.
It's like Yahoo Answers.
It was
for
like
doctors.
Yahoo Answers for doctors. And I was like, this is really just saddening because, and I get it, you know, like it's not expectant that doctors know everything. But it
No.
was just so, like, so blatant that so many of the doctors were like, oh, I don't know, have you told them to go on birth control? And I was like, oh, this is so devastatingly disappointing.
Realistically too, they should be knowing when to refer out and like put their ego to the side and be like, maybe you should see a gynecologist.
Absolutely. It's just like, if you can't help someone,
Mhm.
whether or not you just don't want to, because
Mm-mm.
that happens, or because you are aware that you don't have the
have the-
necessary
yeah.
knowledge or tools to do that, then like find someone in your community that could potentially help this person.
Yeah.
Like, isn't that kind of like isn't the first like thing in the Hippocratic Oath, like, you know, do no harm? It's
Do
like
no
you're kind of
harm.
harming someone by just like leaving them out in a field to, you know, hemorrhage blood and be in a lot of
Yeah.
pain, or, you know, whatever.
Mhm.
It's not cool.
Yeah. And so I think like what I'm trying to say is like I'm very pro people taking like the power and just like finding the help that they need. And so like having an option for like period coaching, I think is so amazing because so much, if you have a uterus, so much of what could potentially be going on with your body could be related to
Mm-hmm.
your uterus. Could be hormone imbalance. It could be, you know, you're feeling severe pain, chronic pain. It could be endometriosis. You know, like there's so many
Yeah.
things that are related to it. And so like almost like it's like giving the power back to the people of like, you know,
For sure.
finding someone that can help them, and then they can maybe go to their doctor and say, okay, listen, like
Mhm.
these are the symptoms I'm having, this is what's going on, I've been tracking my cycle, and you know, like they have a little bit more power. And so
And I think that's actually really interesting too, because like you know a lot. I can just tell that obviously from
Yeah,
your social
so
media.
much.
And one thing in particular that like I saw one of your TikToks recently that like blew my mind, and I was like, what is this? And then we ended up doing like an IGTV show about it that hasn't come out yet, was PME. I'd never heard of this. I saw that and I was like, hold on, like I know so many people just like immediately where I was like, this makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And then I went and did my own research, and I like really, really had to dig like a lot to find any information about it. So
Mhm.
even that is like, there's just so many things that like,
yeah.
Totally. And I think a big thing for people too is so many people just want to be heard and like understood about what they're experiencing, because doctors, I mean, we know a doctor's appointment sometimes is literally like 10 minutes, and half of it might be them gaslighting you about if your pain is actually real and what you're experiencing is real. So for some people, it's just nice to be like heard out and explained why what is happening to their bodies as well, right? And I get it, doctors are busy. Sometimes they don't always have time to explain everything. But that's a flaw in the system that should be fixed. We shouldn't have to just put up with that.
Exactly.
and it's good to have resources for other things like that, because some doctors also are very like open to suggestion if you bring it to them.
Yeah.
So, and actually, so I read through the list of all the things that like, you know, you put on your website for like what you might consider going to a period coach for, and there were two specifically that jumped out at me that relate back to birth control, because I think that conversation is definitely like spherical. There's no like, it's very, yeah, you
Yeah.
know. You have a, like, I don't know if a program is the correct term, but like you have education for both getting on and off of birth control. And I wanted to ask you specifically, because I think a lot of people can kind of relate to that or maybe haven't thought about it before. Why is it important that you have both of those things available?
Yeah, so it all goes back to, I think, the deep core values of a pro-choice feminist that we all deserve to have access. Yeah. We all deserve to have access to the information to make informed choices for ourselves about what's best for our bodies. And again, there's so much biased information online of like, this is why birth control is ruining your body and your fertility, or like, on the other hand, if you have endometriosis, you need to be on birth control. Yeah. And I think it's really important to present to people that unbiased educational information of saying, okay, here's all the hormonal birth control options, here's all the non-hormonal birth control options, and their are pros, cons, and alternatives, which is exactly what a doctor is supposed to be presenting to people. But again, there's not always time. So birth control serves a really important purpose for some people and it doesn't for others. And everybody deserves to be heard and like figure out what is best for their body, right? There's a lot of flack that birth control, like hormonal birth control specifically, gets for, you know, disrupting our natural cycles. First of all, natural is like a really biased, gross word to use because it makes people that don't have a cycle or have a medicated cycle feel like they're less of a person for needing intervention. Yeah. But like birth control literally saves people's lives, both from a contraceptive standpoint as well as symptomatically, right? Like birth control can lessen the risk of cancers for people with endometriosis. And that's really important. It can help people live their lives by masking some of those symptoms that are going on. And likewise, birth control can like really mess up some people's bodies and their psychosis. And so for others, it's really important to know their options for how can I get off of this if it's not a good fit for them and what are their other options. Yeah. So that's where I have had a plethora of education on understanding both, you know, from a medical and scientific standpoint, how birth control works, why it works, but also have gone and taken holistic education to help people who, even if it's just for like a spiritual purpose, would like to have an unmedicated cycle. Yeah. So that's why I think it's really important that everyone should be able to make that choice for themselves and not have all this like external bullshit circling around that's biasing what decision they feel they should make. And I hate the word should in general.
Yes. I think that's a really great point. I think we hear like both sides of it in what we do. We get a lot of, because we try to be also like unbiased in the form of like, hey, like here are some options if you want to look at your cycle and maybe not look at birth control as a solution. But then here are some options for birth control if you are looking for you know, like something that could help you. And I feel like there is a almost like sometimes shame on both sides. Like people feel like, oh, well, you shouldn't be telling me to go off birth control. And we always say like, we're definitely not telling you to do that. Like that is 100% what we're not doing. What we're trying to do is like share information with the community, because there might be one person out there that has been on birth control, is really unhappy, and has never really thought that they could manage their, you know, cycle or whatever without birth control.
Yeah, and there's people that also think that if you're not on birth control, you're going to get pregnant. And they don't understand that, like, if you have a uterus, you can only get pregnant like a couple days of the month.
Exactly. Like it is a small window of time.
Very small window.
And there are many ways you can prevent pregnancy without a, you know, 30-day hormone, you know, like whether it's the pill or even like the IUD or whatever birth control they may be on. Yeah, it's like such a small window, and you can even like cycle tracking and like all those things can be super beneficial. Yeah, I think super beneficial just to anyone. Definitely. But I'm
curious, what, if any, is there like like what's like the number one reason people come and see you for period coaching, if you can think of one? Is there like a trend that is like the main thing?
So I'd say it's shifted a little bit, and I'm not sure if whether that's because of what I put online or what. It used to be people that were like, I have really painful periods. Like, how can we manage that? In which I would give, different options of things they could chat about with their doctor, herbs and supplements that they can try, practices they can do, etc. But lately, like, I think specifically since the pandemic started, it feels illegal to say that word, but since last March, it's really shifted to people that are either wanting to go off of birth control or go on birth control. And I don't know if because people are home more, that they're thinking about that more and their futures, I'm not sure, but that's like probably like 75% of the clients that I'm working with lately is to talk about birth control options. And it's super split on whether it's people wanting to come off of hormonal birth control and look at, unmedicated cycles, or people that are wanting to know their hormone options specifically as well. Like, I'm from Canada, but I get a lot of people from the States that are like, oh, I finally just got health insurance and can afford to have birth control and all these things. So
I wonder if the quarantine, like, parallel of that is potentially also because the conversation about mental health has become so front and center since everyone has been going through this. And I think a lot of people, certainly not all, but are aware that there is a mental health pros and cons list to being on hormonal birth control as well. So I wonder if that
totally
is why is like everyone is so confronted by how they're doing inside right now.
That maybe they've never had time to stop and think about it until now.
Or just how they feel in general. So
exactly.
And that's definitely like a good place to start, is like, how are your hormones?
Well, where are they at?
Totally.
Oh my god. That's really interesting. So anybody listening out there, this sounds like you.
Yeah, definitely.
I love it. And then I want to talk about your clothing line.
Oh yeah.
I love your clothing line. Oh my god. I just read the
Thank you.
No Uterus, No Opinion made me laugh. And then I read your little...
Which is a very controversial design, which I'm happy to discuss as well.
Really? No, please do.
Please do. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, so I started my clothing line about 2 years ago, and No Uterus, No Opinion was my first design. And I thought it was really awesome, which it's a friend's quote from Miss Rachel Green, who, when I think Ross is telling her like, oh, Braxton Hicks contractions aren't that bad. And she's like, no uterus, no opinion. And I thought it was really awesome because I work with a lot of, again, the queer community with their periods. So I work with a lot of men, like transgender men and non-binary people with periods, who often are like left out of the whole concept of like womanhood and periods. So initially I had really great response to it because I was like, this is sweet. This includes anybody with a uterus. And then, growing on TikTok, I got a bit of a bigger audience, and people were like, well, what about like women without periods? And I was like, I totally understand that outlook. And at first view, people might think like, well, what about, trans women or women that have gone through menopause, etc. And my thing is, I'm not saying that this design is about like women's rights. It's literally about body autonomy of everyone deserves to have their own opinions, feelings, and control over their body, whether you have a uterus or not. It's just saying like, hey, this is my uterus. You don't get to police it.
Oh my God.
I think, and it's just because there's so much societal correlation of gender and what organs you have still, that people assume like, oh, well, uterus, we're talking about women's rights. And it's like, no, we aren't. And so I've edited my description of it, but most people get it. And like the queer community has gotten it, and people are really happy about that. But yeah, it was interesting. I did have some people, and once I explained to them like, oh, this actually includes all people with a uterus, and the same goes for people without a uterus. They deserve opinion and choice over their bodies too. People got it. But that's actually what led me to coming up with my body, my choice design, which is a broader statement to kind of encompass that.
I get it. I I like that you went into that
Yeah.
whole thing, because I feel like that's something that both of us, like, you know, obviously, like, we work for a brand, and, you know, you have to, like, put out certain information to make everyone feel included, and everyone should be included. That's always where we're coming from. But we are often yelling and frustrated at work about everyone thinking that everything is about them all the time. And it's like, you know what, it's okay. You're still, like, invited to the party to be supportive, but it doesn't mean that you have to be front and center. Like,
Yeah.
and so I really like that, where it's like, yeah, if you have a uterus, then this is about you, but that doesn't mean that, like, it's exclusive.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
that's the whole idea of, like, yeah, no uterus, no opinion. Like, that's just a fact, in my opinion. Like, that's just a fucking fact. And if you have an opinion about it, then, like, you can go ahead and have that, but it doesn't make it a rule. So
Y'all will probably feel this too. And this is, like, to preface, such a first world problem. But from speaking from someone, like, as, like, I don't have a huge platform, but, like, I've got, like, 58,000 people on TikTok that watch me. What I've noticed is that people that do good are put on, like, a pedestal and, like, a higher expectation to always, like, not fuck up and keep doing better. And it's like, we're all human. We're doing our best. And it's like, you don't see the average person, you know, that's, like, not doing humanitarian work per se, like, getting this kind of, like, you would never, I'm not going to, like, single anyone out, but there's a lot of people that are very, like, woman based, especially in the period world, who would never even get flack for not being inclusive, let alone, like, specifics about inclusivity. So that was something really interesting, where when I realized, like, oh, well, you know, backlash isn't necessarily, like, against me as a person, but it's, you know, people think, like, oh, you're doing great things, but, like, it's always that push to do better, which can be hard.
And it can be very, like, and we're so proud of being, like, a really inclusive period underwear company. Like, that is, like, our main, like, driving force. But like you said, like, it can put you on a pedestal where you make, like, one tiny, tiny, tiny little, you know, you say something that isn't not inclusive. It's just, like, maybe talking about a specific topic that doesn't include everyone.
make someone feel left out.
Yeah,
for
and
whatever
I
reason.
try to always say, like, hey, like, we serve a community of all types of people because we're inclusive. So sometimes our topics are going to be more specific to someone. Doesn't mean it doesn't include you. Like, you know, you can then learn from this specific side of the story. But, you know,
And it doesn't take away from those people either, right? Like, an example that I always think of is, like, okay, during Breast Cancer Awareness Month, we're not like, okay, well, what about prostate cancer? It's like, that still matters and is really important, but, like, right now we're just going to talk about this one thing, and all the other things are still important and valid.
exactly.
And I find that
Just
that's,
for a
like,
minute.
that's definitely, like, a thing where that's very frustrating. Is just, like, and that's also kind of part of just, like, you know, trying to be a good ally is, like, we're all, and even just in periods, it's like we all know that everyone has a different period. We all know that, like, there's a lot of things that affect people differently.
Yeah.
And so if you take that also, like, to the outside, it's like you can still bear witness to someone whose experience is different than yours, and be aware that that's something that they're going through, and it's not something that you're going through. But as a human being who cares about others, you can hear it, you can see it, and respond to it from a place of compassion. But if your immediate thing is, that's not my story, so what the fuck is your point? That does, like, that's definitely something that's, like,
it just kind of feels like you were saying, there's so many people out there doing, like, woman focused period things. They get no flack for not being inclusive, and so it can be a little bit like, hey, like, I'm still just a human, like, behind this, and we're still, like, just trying to be really good people doing a really good thing. And so sometimes, and, like, I'll give an example. So last night we have a post up, and where I literally just created like a chart of like the different phases. And to illustrate roughly how long the phases last, I said like day 1 is your period, about day 7 is, like end of your period, then you go into your ovulation around day 14. So I like break it down into a 28-day cycle.
Which is technically average.
Technically. So then we start getting comments like super mad that I would, and I didn't talk about 28 days being the cycle. Like I actually just was talking about like the hormones and stuff like that. Start getting comments like, oh, like mine isn't 28 days. I won't listen to anybody that doesn't include 32-day cycle. And I was like, really?
You can't give an example for every number of the days.
Like I literally, it would be so long. And I was like, add 1 day to every like break in the diagram, and you got 32 days. It doesn't make it's not excluding you by putting in the diagram.
That's like when we
A
started
rough estimate.
at the beginning of quarantine. We started selling masks because we had the
We had the
capability to do
materials.
that, and we got so many emails. It was like, "This is too big. This is too small. It doesn't fit my face." And it's like everyone's face is different. If we could make a
Yeah.
mask that fit everyone, we
Everyone's
would.
face.
But the reality is, some people have beards, some people have big noses, some people have tiny chins. Like, what do
Like,
you
it's
want?
impossible. Oh, so
I'm sorry that happened.
yeah, that happened last night, and I was like, I don't have the energy to respond to this right now. Like,
But also, like, that's the other thing, too, is just, like, when you're coming from a platform, and whether that's, like, kind of like the personal platform, but it's tied into something that with a bigger message, or tied into a brand with a bigger message or whatever, like, the idea that you have to respond to everyone
yeah,
is very challenging, because some things don't even warrant a response.
yeah,
But like deciding that and trying
hard.
to take the personal out of it is very difficult. Especially when you do respond with something that is like, trying to, placate or just sort of calm down and enlighten, and then you just kind of get the same thing right back. And it's just like, yeah, people forget that there are humans on the other side of this. And it's just like,
yes,
Yeah, which I think is really like inherently toxic, because I have like some people that have followed me from, day 1 and have seen me grow into inclusivity too. And like with any of my like full spectrum doula friends and whatnot, like we look back at like archived posts from 4 years ago at the language we use, like women with an X used to be an acceptable term. It's not anymore.
yeah,
It's not
at
anymore.
all. I just found that
Yeah,
out.
like same here. I'm like, okay, noted. Won't be.
Yeah, and I think it's something where, people make mistakes. I come from a very much so a know better, do better kind of perspective, but it's like not everybody inherently knows everything. So I had a really interesting conversation a couple days ago on like International Women's Day with a coworker from another job who, is very inclusive. And I, just called her and explained like, hey, like this is why, the queer community might interpret your post differently. And we had a great conversation, and she edited it. And that was that. But there's so many people online where they see you using a certain term. And instead of being like, hey, this is how you could maybe make this, a little bit more inclusive, people just like attack or cancel. And it's like, how is anybody supposed to start and grow into being more inclusive if nobody's going to be patient and be like, oh, you didn't know that, you could do this way? And then it can make it really intimidating.
Yeah, but also this is a space that is evolving all the time, and it is
All the
evolving like
time.
I would say pretty quickly in the last couple years. And so it can be, difficult to keep up. Know better, do better attitude towards
Yeah.
everything is very helpful and beneficial, and it doesn't mean that you have to be ashamed of where you were at before you did know better. It's like we're all learning, and we all do want to be better, and we're all trying. Well, maybe we're not all trying.
We're not
but
all
some
trying.
of us are trying really hard.
Some of us are trying really hard. And
Exactly.
I think it's fair to like
Cut people some fucking
yeah,
slack.
like you grow, you learn, like cut people some slack. I think there's also like, you know, being a brand and being on social media, sometimes people will interact with one post and then they will assume, oh, you're not inclusive. Oh, you're not XYZ. And you're like, oh, actually, if you just go check out literally like the post beside this, like you'll see that we talk about everything here. Like we're not just talking about one thing. And so it's almost like you're not even given like the slice of time to like, oh, actually just like go check out our whole feed. Like see what
Yes.
we're all about. They'll interact with one post and they'll be like, this is not, you know, you're totally excluding XYZ. And I understand people's initial feelings because I think it's important to recognize when people are excluding groups and stuff like that. I think it's really important to talk about it and to like address it when it's happening because that's how people learn. Like if you don't say like, hey, you're actually like missing something here, then how are they gonna learn about it? But if they didn't know about it, give them the space to be like, oh, okay, cool. I never thought about it like that, but now I will, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I had like, there was someone that posted, I can't remember what the post I posted about. But it was something about like gender inclusive periods. And a person commented just being like, I'm confused. Like, how can men have periods? And I simply replied,
She's very open.
yeah, and I was like, great question. Like we serve like transgender men and non-binary people. There's lots of people that menstruate. Like it's a whole spectrum of people. They commented back, wow, thank you. Like I've never thought of it like that. And they were like, I apologize if my initial question seemed exclusionary, but now I know. I'm like,
that's so
wonderful.
cute.
Like this was like the best interaction ever. And I was like, this was so cool. And so it's like you can just ask. And that's why I love like the platform that we have when people ask questions like that. I'm like, so just like, oh, great question. Let me answer. Because it's like we try to be a neutral space where people can come and learn. And so they're not going to get, you know, like hate for asking, oh, like, how does a man menstruate? You know?
It's like,
so,
let me tell you.
Yeah, great question. Let me tell you. So, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think it's kind of reassuring to like hear from someone else that's also working in like an inclusive space on social media
but coming from a point of neutrality.
Yeah.
I wish that I could find more people like you to be perfectly honest. Like that
it's
acknowledges the learning journey that we're on, but also that like, you know, we do still have like a long way to go. And let's just get like the facts, like the science and all that stuff. Like, you know, let's all just like get right with ourselves so that we can do better.
Yeah.
I think
I think it's like super helpful. And I think, like I think it is just like that learning and like even just like learning about periods, you learn like, oh, okay, like there's a reason why this happens or whatever. Like we are not born with the knowledge and we're not necessarily taught the information. So it's like a lot of personal research, a lot of things that we're having to do. And so I think with any platform like either of ours where we are trying to be inclusive and give a lot of information, there is like, I think it's fair to ask for a little bit of breathing room to like try out and learn and
and even for considering, you know, all the period or anything related to gender and whatnot, all these other companies that people are like, oh, you know, you need to be doing better. It's like, okay, well, like, are you going to tell them how?
That's a really good point.
On them. It's not very constructive in that manner.
It's so true.
Absolutely.
I totally agree.
Well, yeah. So
I love it.
back to the clothing line.
That
Where
was
this
a
all
big
began,
tangent.
but I do love your clothing line, and
Yeah.
I'm going to make a purchase very
Yeah, we
soon.
need to get some mugs in here.
Yeah.
Fancier mugs.
So one really cool thing besides how cool the stuff is that every item purchased, I believe, you donate a whole box of menstrual hygiene, whether that's tampons or pads, or I think on occasion cups, but maybe not so much, specifically to northern communities in Canadian provinces and territories. And I think that that's so amazing. But the specific question that I wanted to ask is, because I think that, you know, obviously period equity is something that's really important to you as it is to us. Why the North? Why do you want to donate these specifically? Like, why not to, you know, Metro Toronto?
Yeah. So one thing that really blew my mind when I was looking, you know, when I started this, and I was like, okay, where am I going to donate these to? I stumbled across an article about a community actually in Northern Ontario, an Indigenous community, and read that a box of like 40 tampons up there cost $25, and here it costs me $5.99 to purchase. And then it got me into the rabbit hole of reading that in like the territories, which are even farther up north, it can cost upwards of $40 to purchase a box of period products.
Ugh.
Oh, wow.
I've seen like the photos that people sometimes take in like the grocery store in like a Iqaluit or something, where there's like a big jug of milk that's like $16, and
Yeah.
it's like, whoa. But I honestly still don't really think of like period products so much as, and I think it's because of, you know, coming from kind of a place of, you know, sort of privilege as well. As like, well, I mean, obviously I get period underwear from my work and stuff, but before that it's just like, yeah, buying when I used disposables was expensive, but it certainly wasn't out of the question expensive for me. It was just because
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we also don't live in a, like, y'all and I specifically where we are in British Columbia and me in Southern Ontario, we don't live in a place where we would have to anticipate the barriers that cause the inflation of prices, right? So many of these communities are very snowy throughout most of the year. And so, you know, even like specifically thinking as well about like all the remote communities in the territories and in the north as well, where like they don't even have road access, where snow plows are coming to plow the roads. They can't import goods very easily. So they have to fly them and bring them by train, and sometimes by car, train, and plane, which generally, like as a blanket statement, it said that when something has to be imported by plane or train up north, it automatically adds 13% to the price that it's going to be sold. But then it keeps going from there to that, well, they can't sustainably afford to fly in goods all the time, especially like smaller communities. So then it's like, okay, well, they're going to have to bulk order these products and then pay to store them in storage so that these stores can access their inventory when they need it. So there's so many factors that go into these price inflations. And then of course, there's also like, okay, well, if there's only one store in a 100-mile radius, they can jack up their prices a little bit. And so there's reasons that come into it being so expensive, but it literally all comes back to the government in thinking that we should have to buy these products and that they're optional, and that if you can't afford them, too bad, which is not okay.
No.
So that's why I was like, well, if I'm going to donate them somewhere, I think that there needs to be more awareness brought to specifically like how many more barriers there are for northern, like specifically Indigenous communities in Canada to access these products. Because there is right now a good amount of awareness on general menstrual equity, but I think a lot of people are shocked when they learn like it's like quadruple the price to buy a box of tampons up north compared to here, which then leads to, it's like a snowball, right? It just leads to health issues, because if they're having to use socks and old towels and receipts, A, that puts you at risk of infection, and B, sometimes you can't go to school or work if you have to stay home and bleed on a towel.
Yeah,
absolutely.
precisely.
So many awful ways that it negatively impacts people that bleed in these communities.
I think that,
Wow.
like, one thing I've been watching a lot of just like, you know, I've been reading a lot and also just watching a lot of videos on like, you know, menstrual equity and stuff like that. And something whenever I see an interview that's with someone who's like not specifically in this space, one thing that seems to really not be understood is that this actually is beyond just the financial aspect of like being able to afford it. This is a public health issue, 100%. This is a serious public health issue.
Yeah.
And so even if you know, can afford, but you can't access, if you're in the north or something like that, like that is,
Yes.
that is
Clean water, which is a big issue in Indigenous communities.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
it is. And also really unacceptable that is like still a thing. I saw that on your TikTok as well, where I think someone asked you whether or not you donate menstrual cups, and you said sometimes, and then you brought up that really good point of like, you know, donating reusables. And obviously we're huge proponents of reusables, not
Totally.
only because that's what we work in, but also for so many other reasons, just as people. But it does presuppose that you have access to clean water, that you have access to laundry, all that stuff. And the reality that is very easy to forget when you're not confronted with that is that a lot of people in Canada and America and across the world do not. It's just not.
And it all kind of comes back to like, again, the whole pressure that's placed on people, where I think people do come in assuming sometimes, because I do talk a lot about sustainable period products, because generally those with internet and a phone have privilege already in being able to access, you know, water and all of these things, but not always. So it is really interesting to people when I do talk about why I don't often donate cloth pads, reusable period underwear, and menstrual cups, because they think like, oh, well, we live in, you know, a first world country. Everybody has clean water. It's like, no, literally right outside London, Ontario, where I'm located, you literally cross the road to the res and they don't have clean water. They have a boil water advisory. And it's been that way for years.
That's so
Exactly.
heartbreaking.
It is. It is heartbreaking. And I think it's extremely disappointing. And I think like the fact that you then are bringing that up and sharing that with the community is really important, because it is then highlighting those issues and like bringing it home.
Disposables do serve a time and a place. And not everyone has the privilege for reusables. But then again, I also talk a lot about, if you do have the privilege, why you should use reusable.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons.
There's a lot of reasons. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. It's that same, like, you know, the same thing back to like the birth control thing of just like, this is like a spherical narrative. There's so many aspects that you do need to like concern yourself with. But if you're making a personal choice and you're able to be pretty like free in that personal choice, then like here's the reasons why maybe you should do this. But
I totally agree.
I do think that that's really cool. And I actually did just want to like quickly ask you, like, why with, you know, your clothing line, like, why did you want to donate products to begin with? Like, what put you, was there like a moment when you realized like you wanted to be doing this and maybe this was a way you could?
Yeah. So I see a lot of companies out there that like many big companies, right, that claim to have like charitable components of their business, but have no transparency of like, is this actually going somewhere? Is this for tax purposes that you're doing this? And I was like, no, I want people to like see the change that they're making. And, you know, I get something else that comes up with people is like, oh, well, why wouldn't you just donate a box? And it's like, well, the point is that people can, if they can afford to have something with a message on it, that part of their money is going to something good. So anyways, that was basically where I wanted to come in with being like, okay, well, people that are privileged enough to financially buy a fun sweater with like a feminist message, that their money will also be going somewhere positive. Just because I see, and I'm not going to name drop any, but I see even sometimes small brands that are like, we donate a portion of our proceeds towards menstrual equity. And it's like, okay, where's the receipts?
Yeah. Where's it going? Yeah.
Where's the money going? Like, what is going on? Are you saying this to try and get people to buy your product? So that's why I've always been very transparent with, you know, when I do usually 4 times a year send products, I do like a video, I do a count so everybody can see like, this is the impact that the community has made. So it's just a nice way to like connect and community support to be able to directly support fellow menstruators.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
And I think that is really like kind of showing exactly where it's going, I think says a lot more than just saying like a portion of your proceeds go to, you know, XYZ.
Yeah.
And I think that's like something like we right now are like unable to do with like our like basically just with how our business is right now. And it's, I think there's also like a little bit of expectation when you're in a space to donate. And we do make donations. Like we literally just dropped off
We just dropped off like 60 pairs of underwear to the local women's shelter, and it was, I mean, like, again, not all of them have access to like clean water and stuff like that. At the very least, they can just wear them as underwear if they're not wearing them as anything else.
But it's like with basically just, we're a small business with very tight margins right now. And that is just how it is. Like, and we don't want to be putting out there like, oh, we donate, you know, X proceeds, because it's irregular. We make it when we can do it, we do it, but it's like it's not something that we can do on like a regular basis right now.
Yeah. And I think that a perspective to put for that as well is that, you know, as a consumer, for anybody listening to this, think like, would you be able to take out from how much you make every month to donate, you know, X, Y, and Z amounts of menstrual products? There's so many ways to make a difference in menstrual equity and period poverty without donating and spending money at all, even, right? Like running campaigns in schools for drives for period products, or writing letters to your local MPs or whatever the equivalent of that is, senators in the States, I don't know, local government to be like, hey, you need to, you know, in countries where the whatever they call it, the pink tax, period taxes still exist. Like, this is why you need to do this. Or like, hey, what's your plan for making period products accessible to people experiencing homelessness? And there's ways other than just spending money to make a difference.
Exactly.
Definitely.
And I think that is like something that is like really important to highlight, is that there are other ways. And like with like particularly like I find with our brand, like it's something that we do, like I said, like we do not on a regular basis, but when we can. But on the flip side, like, and now I'm just kind of like, I guess, explaining like our side of things. It's like, we're also employing people at regular, like living wages. We're like, we have health benefits. We have all these things that like internally our company does for the people we employ that a lot of small brands don't do. And that might take away from our ability to donate right now, but it's like building a foundation that's going to keep our company healthy, and it's going to keep our company kind of, I guess, like it builds the foundation that we're never going to go back from here. Like, we're always going to have benefits, we're going to have living wages, and that might stop us from doing some things, but it's going to make sure that as we grow in the future, we're going to have like these healthy protocols for employment. And in this industry, like fashion, and let alone manufacturing, that is unheard of. Like, it is truly unheard of. And so we're really trying to make a difference in just even our community, like where like we are hiring people and stuff like that.
Totally. And again, that really circles back to the whole, like, when you see someone doing good, you expect more, right? Because it's like, first of all, you don't have to talk about when you do good. I had like a TikTok series where I was making earrings out of period related things. I was making them out of like pads, which first of all, the pads were biodegradable, so it was going to be fine anyways, but they were like, why are you wasting these and not donating them? And I hadn't made a TikTok video in like a couple of weeks about my clothing line, and I made one, and I was like, I literally donate hundreds of period products every month. I just don't have to talk about that all the time. Like,
exactly.
No, that's true. Like,
it's interesting because it's like, okay, like, do we just have such low standards that we assume that nobody's doing any good. Like the fact that you have to say like, we pay people a livable wage and ethically make these clothes.
Yeah.
It's like, that's huge in itself, because our standards realistically are pretty low in general for seeing good done in the world, which I think is why people demand being like, well, why don't you do this and do that? Because they assume you're not already doing good. And it's a weird world out there.
Yeah,
It
like
is.
nobody out here is a saint, but we're all just doing the best that we can, and that's okay. And also, like, don't turn everyone into a freaking martyr. Like, it's not, do or die. There's bigger things to be.
And there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes that you just don't highlight.
That's
like,
true. And you don't have to.
No. Like,
it's
there's
up to you.
And it's kind of, sometimes you're like, okay, well, I understand, like, as a brand, we will want to set up a program where we are making donations on a regular basis once our income is far more regular. Our income is not currently very regular. Like, that is, like we just told you, we don't have any elastic, so we have tons of underwear that's just like not on our website yet. It's just sitting there waiting, so we're like out of stock. And it's like, at this time, if we were then having to like make a big donation, it would really affect our cash flow. And like, there's so many things behind the scenes, like, that's not a sustainable way to like have a business right now. But at the same time, like, we work really hard to be really good employers, like really, really good employers. And that is something that I would say is right now more important to us.
For sure.
Say that we won't have a donation program in the future.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of things behind the scenes that could explain why we're not necessarily doing that. But it's like, I think
we're all just doing our damn best.
Oh my God. And also, like, there's so many things going on in the world right now that make it really easy to just like totally turtle. And the fact that we all still just show up and try to do our best, I feel like everybody should get a pat on the back, or at the very least, like I said earlier, like, cut some fucking slack. Yeah. For real. Like,
for real. We're still showing up every day.
So, I would like to ask you to tell the people, if they want to, where can they find you if they want to be engaged with you on a content level, or if they want to procure your services as a period coach?
Yeah, so my website is theelephantinthewomb.net, because .com was taken and I couldn't afford to buy that out from someone.
Been there.
Been there.
And then my Instagram is at the elephant in the womb, and my TikTok is at Vixauce, because I made it just to watch, and then decided after that I was going to post videos. And then it was like, oh, actually, this is going to become your biggest platform. So Vixauce on TikTok.
Well, this has been
so much.
So awesome. Yeah. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. We really appreciate it. And
thanks for listening.
Why So Mysterious is hosted by Sara Jonsdottir and Raven McLean. Audio is produced and edited by Sonia Inke. Original music is by Malcolm Holt and Alexis Young.
Check out our website, whysomysterious.com, for more information about this episode and other episodes. You can also email us with questions or topics you'd like to hear us cover on the show at whysomysteriousPod@gmail.com.
Follow us on Instagram at whysomysteriousPod for updates, fun facts, and general outrage. If you're an audio listener, but you'd rather be a voyeur, check us out on YouTube.
If you like the show, tell your friends, and don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Until next time!